Have a good break. It's the first time I'm seeing you.
Yeah.
Wherever it is you work.
How many classes?
You have any classes?
With you?
Oh, no. I'm not teaching.
Not at all?
No, I teach at first and fall. This rest of the year, but I don't teach. We have, yeah.
So do you research during the week on campus? Or
Oh, no, I'm never here.
Just for us.
Pretty much, yeah, I'm here for stuff. Yeah, I don't.
People, you come to like the West Coast and
Well, I never like working.
It sounds like you're becoming a snowman.
You know, I used to
Said I'm here for a spell.
a few hours out of the day. Yeah, talk to me sometime.
Waiting to see.
Tomorrow, 3.0, you're probably going to explain the 1.0 and 2.0. Oh, I saw that. Now you said it.
Yeah, because we haven't seen him yet.
So it's a pretty grandiose plan. Pretty grandiose. Pretty good.
I mean, do you want me to like will I be getting the thing from George Mason? Very often they have experience about.
Yeah, I think they're gonna send it to you. I haven't like as far as I know, they'll send them to you.
I'm just going to stare at your keys, not take my eyes off them,
Yeah, and I'll thank you for that.
so that I can remind you of things.
It's not like I'll get far, but I'll get to the car.
Yeah.
I'll say, I'll come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, I live in Cary.
So you better stay with the keys. We're doing it.
Wait, do you live here? Oh, really? It's showing.
Yeah, just tell me you're president and
All right.
let me just. I'll say what it is. Okay, I'm just going to take a second out of Sasha's introduction time here. I was something I want to point out. Oh, by the way, I'm Roy Cordato. He's really good at applauding. And wait till you mention his name. You don't even have to mention his name. Just reference it. What was I going to say? It's so distracting. Friday, for those of you who don't know and have some interest in it, we're having our first meeting of the Austrian Economics Forum. Taylor is the guy who's organizing it. So it's a discussion group centered around a reading. This week we're going to be reading Hayek's Meaning of Competition. So if anyone's interested in that, see Taylor sometime before you leave. He'll put you on our list. We meet every other Friday at 3:30 for an hour and a half or so. Read a paper, chit chat about it. So that said, our new president, Sasha, will introduce our speaker.
All right, so I'm Sasha, and I'm the president of SPEL, Dr. Cordato has said. And so to introduce our speaker, Professor Munger received his PhD in economics at Washington University in St. Louis in 1984. Following his graduate training, he worked as a staff economist at the Federal Trade Commission, and his first job teaching was in economics department at Dartmouth College, followed by appointments in the political science department at the University of Texas in Austin in the 80s to 90s, and then at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the 90s. At UNC, he directed the MPA program, which trains public service professionals, especially in city and county management. He moved to Duke in 1997 and was the chair of the political science department from 2000 to 2010. He won 3 university-wide teaching awards, which were the Howard Johnson Award, the NAACP Image Award for Teaching About Race, and admission to Black Society Teaching Fellows. He is currently the director of the Interdisciplinary PPE program at Truist University. His research interests include the study of the morality of exchange and the workings of legislative institutions in producing policy. Much of his recent work has been in philosophy, examining the concept of truly voluntary exchange, a concept which he has coined the term for EU-voluntary. He has created a new blog devoted to investigating examples of controversies about EU-voluntary exchange. His primary blog, His Expertise, is an irreverent look at policy, politics, and the foibles of countries everywhere. So here's Professor Munger.
Thank you. Yeah, I can summarize the introduction. He's really old and can't hold a job. The others were all details. This is it's a presentation from a book that's in progress, and for those of you who have experience writing books, all your unwritten work is brilliant. And then as it becomes more written, it becomes less brilliant. Because you learn the holes where there is something like a miracle occurs here. You know, step 1, step 2, step 3 is a miracle occurs here, and then step 4. And I'm hoping that you can help me with the miracle. So I'm presenting the outline of the book, and it's pretty simple. The outline is pretty simple. In some ways, it derives from econ talk that I did with Russ Roberts in 2014, so a little more than a year ago now. And it was an interesting thing to think about. We talked about the sharing economy, and I worked on preparing for that talk. And one of the things that I came across, well, first of all, just he's an actual living conehead. I want mass quantities of beer. But he's Mark Andreessen, and so he can afford mass quantities of beer. Wall Street Journal article in November 2011 said software is eating the world. More and more major businesses and industries are being run on software and delivered as online services, from movies to agriculture to national defense. Many of the winners are Silicon Valley-style entrepreneurial technology companies that are invading and overturning established industry structures. Over the next 10 years, I expect many more industries to be disrupted by software, with new world-beating Silicon Valley companies doing the disruption in more cases than not. 6 decades into the computer revolution, 4 decades since the invention of the microprocessor, and 2 decades into the rise of the modern internet, all of the technology required to transform industries through software finally works and can be widely delivered at global scale. So why would he say that software eats the world? The title of my book is Tomorrow 3.0, which suggests that there was a 1.0 and a 2.0. Now, 0, the default state, was hunter-gatherer society. 1.0 was after the Neolithic Revolution and the transformation to settled agriculture. 2.0 is after the Industrial Revolution and the exploitation of division of labor and economies of scale. Many, many people in the Industrial Revolution lost their jobs to mechanization and the increased productivity that you get from division of labor. We now think of people losing their jobs to robots, but robots make physical things. The thesis of my book is that in Tomorrow 3.0, entrepreneurs are mostly going to make profits from selling reductions in transactions costs. Entrepreneurs are going to make money by selling reductions in transactions costs. Until now, in the Industrial Revolution, entrepreneurs either made new products or found ways to sell reductions in production costs. So it's a different thing. It's a fundamentally different thing to sell reductions in transactions costs, because then you're making dramatically more efficient use of existing resources. which is why many people call this the sharing economy. Now, when you think of it, both of the previous revolutions involved sharing also. And these are the chapters that I've been working on, so I don't have slides much about them, but I want to give you a 30-second description for why that's true. Adam Smith has the example of the poor person who can buy a woolen coat. And that woolen coat was produced by division of labor. Now, it meant that all the people who made any part of the woolen coat worked for the person who bought the woolen coat. So I buy a coat, and it has many different components, and the things come from all over the world, and they're put together on a production line. Every person who worked on making any of those things worked for me briefly. But the fact that an entrepreneur put them together in the form of a woolen coat meant that I didn't have to go through all of the steps of hiring them. Division of labor causes labor to be shared out in a very efficient way. Software is the robot of tomorrow. Software is the robot of tomorrow. Software is going to throw millions and millions of people out of jobs. So when I rent a car, I go to the airport, fly, land. I get on my cell phone an SMS text saying your car is in space B31. I walk to it, I get in, the keys are in it. I drive that car, which was selected for me by software which months ago I had chosen. I get to the checkout place, and there is a human being there. There's one human being who looks and checks my ID to make sure I'm not stealing the car. Otherwise, it's completely automated. This is a process that used to take 4 or 5 people. It now takes none because software has reduced all of the transactions costs. I made the reservation online, I made the choice, I paid, no money changes hands, I don't even have to get out my credit card. All of these reductions in transactions costs are effected by software, which is why software is going to transform the world in much the same way and with all of the same destructive power that the Industrial Revolution had on the norms and culture of widely divided farm communities. It's extremely destructive. It's going to change almost everything about your lives. Let's take a step back and see why sharing is important. A video.
In 1944, at the height of World War II, a British economist named Radcliffe was serving in the army. He was captured and lived in prison camps for more than a year. Prisoners at the camps received Red Cross packages that contained food, cigarettes, and a few necessities. These were precious supplies in POW camps. At first, prisoners gave away the things they didn't like, but before long, they started trading instead. Bedford's explanation of this behavior may surprise you. Very soon after capture, people realized it was both undesirable and unnecessary in view of the limited size and the quality of supplies to give away or to accept gifts of cigarettes or food. Goodwill developed into trading as a more equitable means of maximizing individual satisfaction. More equitable? Really? Why would exchange be more equitable than gifts? Well, in a voluntary exchange, both parties are better off, or they wouldn't trade at all. Gifts are nice, but only the person receiving the gift is better off. Of course, the giver might expect a gift in return, but then that's exchange. There are 2 reasons that this is important. Exchange corrects mistake in allocation because it moves stuff towards higher valued uses, and exchange makes everyone who exchanges a lot happier. There are 2 basic origins of exchange, and both are important. First, same stuff, different preferences. Let's say we go on a field trip with box lunches that each contain a sandwich, chips, pickle, and a cookie. I like chips, and you like cookies. I'm doing my pickle to get you to agree, and we make the exchange. We're both happier with our lunches, even though we're still dealing with the same amount of food overall. Second, there's same preferences, different stuff. Suppose I have apples and you have oranges. But we both prefer eating fruit salad with the 2 mixed together. If we exchange, then we can both have fruit salad, or both happier with the same amount of fruit. That's remarkable. In a a world of scarce resources, each voluntary transaction means that people get happier without any change to the total wealth that was available. That's what makes trade so powerful. What if we have different stuff and different preferences? I do an exercise in class to illustrate this. I give away t-shirts to my students, but I cheat. I make sure almost every one of them ends up with the wrong size. So I ask, are you happy with your t-shirts? Maybe 10% say that they are. Then I let them exchange shirts if they want to, but only with their neighbors in the same row. Nonetheless, shirts move. You trade with your neighbor, she trades with hers. The shirts travel around, improving the welfare of both buyer and seller at every step. When it's over, maybe 30% of the students are happy with their shirt. It's a big improvement, but still not great. Then I let people trade with anyone in the class. The class goes wild. Extra larges trade for small, mediums for larges, and so on. It looks like chaos, with people waving shirts and calling out sizes. No plan, no direction. But at the end of trading, how many say they're happy? 90% or more. The same number of shirts as the start, no one in charge, and yet we went from 10% satisfied to 90% satisfied. Some of the shirts changed hands many times. No one knew where the shirt was headed, it just went. And everyone who exchanged was happy. It seems like magic, but it's just markets. Keep learning liberty.
So, one of my dissertation advisors was Douglas North, who recently died at my dissertation defense. And dissertation defense is a very scary point for a graduate student, because you basically find out, are you going to live or die? And you think you're going to die. And it doesn't even seem like a bad idea, because it's pretty scary. So one of the first people to ask a question was Doug, and I, being an economist, was trying to answer his question. I was up at the board writing equations, and Doug finally put up his hand mercifully, and as if he was talking to a small child. Mike, no. The answer is transactions costs. And I later realized it didn't matter what the question was for Doug, the answer is transactions costs. So I actually think that's right. And it's the reduction in transactions cost that's going to make all the difference. And normally, we think of this example with the shirts as being an illustration of the title of the third chapter in Book 1 in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which is that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. The title of the chapter is a theorem that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. Division of labor wants to be bigger. Adam Smith gave the example of the pin factory. Does anybody remember how many different spots there were in the pin factory? How many people worked on the production line in the pin factory? It was 18. Why? It's completely arbitrary. It just depends on the size of the market. In a smaller market, it might have been 4. In a larger market, it might have been 25. Because you break the production process down into more and more steps to realize greater amounts of productivity, given the costs of breaking it down into more steps and the size of the market that you serve. So I used to think about this exchange example as, if I can only exchange with people next to me, there's protectionism. So I can only trade within a small country. But then if you can trade within the entire continent, everybody on your row, more shirts changed hands and people were better off. And then you can change with anybody in the whole room, and that's more like the extent of the market. But I realized that it also this could be transactions costs. Businesses face a decision that we think of as make or buy. What things should businesses make and what should they buy? Well, Ronald Coase, in his celebrated 1937 paper on the nature of the firm, said that the answer was, you're killing me, transactions costs. Damn. You had pizza, it's late, wake up.
More caffeine.
The answer is transactions costs. Well, and he was right too. So, if I make it, I'm organizing an additional transaction within the firm. If I buy it, I'm using the market to acquire it. How will I decide which is more expensive? Well, I'll look to see whether the transactions cost is higher than the cost of using the market. In Tomorrow 3.0, we're all going to face the rent or own decision. And the rent or own decision, that margin will depend on
Transaction costs?
damn money. Church. It depends on transactions cost. Why do you own anything? I'm going to say the answer is transactions cost. Consider a widget. I actually got a picture of a widget, and that's not easy because a widget is a mythical thing. And this is a pretty manly widget I think Margolis is going to approve because it looks like part of a car. This could easily be part of a car.
Tractor,
It's got gears. It's hard metal. The gears articulate. I don't really actually do anything, so it is a pretty good widget. And it's got buttons. So anyway, it's a widget. A owns it, and will take any price greater than 1. B wants it, and will pay any price less than 5. What might keep this transaction from occurring?
transaction costs.
All right, I won't ask again, but I'll just wave my hand or something. It's a mistake for A to own this. I have a large storage unit because I have 2 damn sons that went to college and left and said, no, we still want this. One of them's in graduate school, a very good PhD student at NYU, and he's still got a bunch of stuff. Why do I have that? It makes no sense for me to pay $145 a month for a really excellent large steel container, big enough to hold 2 cars. This is a better living quarter than many people in the world have to live in. But it would be more expensive for me to get rid of than it is for the $145. But if I could find someone that would pay for it, I would happily sell it. I'm paying more than $1,000 a year to store this stuff. Well over $1,000 a year to store it. B should, in a moral sense, have this. Because there exists a mutually beneficial transaction. And we're losing the deadweight loss of this transaction not taking place. When you add it up across all the transactions that don't take place, it sort of reminds you of Basquiat's Unseen. When you think of all the transactions that would be mutually beneficial that don't take place because of transactions costs, it's enormous. But let's suppose that transactions cost are 7. Well, since the surplus of that exchange was only at most 4, if transactions cost are 7, the transaction would never take place. And in fact, A and B might never have thought about having some sort of market transaction in the first place. This is not something that's commodified. I would throw it away or just not use it, even though somebody does in fact value it more than I do. But suppose that an entrepreneur has a piece of software that reduces transactions cost by $6, from 7 down to 1. Well, a transaction is now possible. B pays 4. Remember, he paid 5, so he's better off by $1. E takes 1 for the licensing cost of the software. $1 is lost to transactions cost, and transactions cost play the role that friction or heat loss plays in physics. It just dissipated, it's gone. And A receives $2, which is more than the $1 reservation price that he had. So 3 people make $1, and $1 is just used up in transactions cost. But more importantly, the widget now is owned by the person who should own it. The world is wealthier and more prosperous, and there's no production. There's no change in the amount of stuff. So if you think, as some people do, that we're reaching the limits of our ability to produce new stuff, you might be concerned to make sure that we use the stuff that we already have more efficiently, that we direct ownership and use of the existing resources more accurately to the people who can use it, who want it. So, why do we own anything? What you actually want, and this is an old fundamental insight of Austrian economics, what you actually want is the stream of services that come from an item. If you're talking about a durable capital good or even a durable consumer good, What you're actually interested in is the stream of services. The reason you own it rather than rent it is that it's easier to rent it from yourself. It's easier for me to acquire it and have the capital tied up in it. But that's only because of transactions costs. There's nothing inherent about our preference for owning things. And I have had people say, well, but people actually like to own things. And that's true, I think, for old guys like me. But I'm really a Rousseauian on this point. The ideas of what cause status are probably socially constructed. Not entirely, but if I really could own something, if I really could rent something and it was cheaper and better than owning it, I might be willing to forego that. And in fact, I find that many young people see status as the accumulation of experience rather than physical things. So it's not that common to see a 22 or 23-year-old person have on their Facebook page a picture of their car. It is really common to see them skydiving, or in Africa, or in Asia. They do stuff rather than own stuff. And if you want to do stuff, having an apartment that's full of stuff is a drawback. You have to take care of it, and it's expensive. My 26-year-old son owns basically nothing. And he goes all over the place. Just spent 2 weeks in Cuba. I, on the other hand, have a shrine at my house. And in it is a beautiful, shiny, black BMW 330. And when I approach the shrine, the door to the shrine opens and I drive into it and it's well lit and warm. And there's some stuff on the walls. And then I have a not as nice shrine for it at Duke. The one at home we call the garage, the one at Duke we call the parking lot. I live in northwest Raleigh. I have about a 20-minute drive each way. So for 40 minutes a day at most, I use that car. For the other 23 hours and 20 minutes, it just sits there. Sometimes in the shrine and sometimes in the parking space. Why? Why do you own cars? Now, I own a car because I really like being the sort of guy that's cutting in and out of traffic in a black BMW 330. I will admit, I'm that guy. I'm sorry. You've probably done this or worse. But there's plenty of people that don't value that much, and if you're in a place with a lot of traffic, it gets old pretty soon. So instead of having all of these cars used 40 minutes a day and occupying expensive real estate, why wouldn't you just rent the transportation services instead? Particularly if it was possible to do it really cheaply through software. I have a laptop. It's pretty heavy. I don't use it very often. It's pretty expensive. Why don't I just rent a laptop every time I go on a trip? It's just transactions cost. But it's becoming more and more possible for me to do that because all of my software and my files live in the cloud. All I need is a physical thing to be able to sign into that software and use those files. So it would be just as easy for there to be, instead of Hertz Rent-A-Car, a Laptopia at the airport. When I arrive, I go, I slide my credit card, the laptop that I have pre-selected, that's already preloaded with the stuff that I want on it, comes out, and then when I'm done, when I come back, I turn it back in. That's a whole lot cheaper. Doesn't depreciate. I don't have to worry about losing it. I don't have to carry it around. What I want is, I probably use a laptop 6 hours a month, and yet I own 3. Transactions cost. So, has anybody used BlaBlaCar? How does it work?
You basically type up where you want to go and where you're going, and it finds people who are going in that same direction. You can choose to ride with the person, you take a seat in their car, and it's all done online.
Where do you hitchhike? Not late.
Why? Transactions cost. Transactions cost. There's 3 transactions cost at work here. Triangulation, transaction, and trust. Triangulation, transaction, and trust. You have to find each other. You have to know that this person is going to another city and you want to go to another city at the same time. BlaBlaCar is hitchhiking. BlaBlaCar is a market in hitchhiking. It's widely used in Europe. I've given versions of this talk in Slovakia, Czech Republic, Austria, Romania. 2/3 of the students raise their hand. They use it all the time. It's much cheaper than the train. It's faster. There's a bunch of cars, trucks, empty seat, and Roy is not using them. I don't hitchhike either. It's hard to find someone who's going right where you are. Now, the way we used to solve that was you stand out there with your thumb out. So the triangulation part wasn't that hard, although it was uncomfortable. The transaction part was you had to pay in a way for a range of the deal you had to negotiate. The transaction part was a little bit of a hassle, plus having a money is dangerous. The trust part is difficult. But if you're younger than 30, you're used to outsourcing trust. You're used to a system on eBay or Amazon where sellers are rated with reputation. And notice that these are independent judgments. Now, it's possible to game it a little bit. You can learn a lot. Somebody has 1,000 ratings on eBay and they're 96% positive, that's probably someone you can deal with. Because a reputation is a capital asset that's also a hostage. It is tied up and gagged in the basement of your parents' house. Let me go, no! If you violate the terms of this deal, I'll kill the hostage. The brand name dies. It's asymmetric. It doesn't take many bad comments. Y'all look at Yelp for a restaurant. What are you looking for? Good comments? Hell no. If you're looking for 2 or 3 bad, I'm not going there. I mean, that's terrible. If there's 2 or 3 bad comments, you're out. It's easy to kill a reputation. So we can also outsource trust. Those are the 3 parts of transactions cost. The triangulation, the finding, getting the information about who wants what, where they are, where they're going. Handling the transaction itself, negotiating terms, effecting the transfer of the payment. And trust, ensuring that you're not going to be harmed or you're not going to cheat on the terms of the transaction. If you can accomplish those 3 things through software, all sorts of things that until now we haven't really thought of as commodities are possible. Now, a fair number of people use Uber, but that's really a taxi service. I think what's interesting about BlaBlaCar is that it's hitchhiking. And almost nobody in the US hitchhikes now. But when you think about it, it makes no sense to have that empty seat and me wanting to go to the same place that the person driving that empty seat is going. I have an empty seat, you have the need for a ride, you can pay me a very small amount. My marginal cost, assuming I can solve the 3 problems, is tiny. Anything over that cost is enough. Now here's the thing that's interesting. If I provide transportation services, I have to cover my average costs. If I'm taking a hitchhiker, I only have to cover my marginal costs. It's far less. If I, the truck driver, can cover whatever the marginal cost is, plus a little bit of the gas or whatever money, I'm ahead, and so are you. So for all of these things, one of the value propositions is all you really have to pay, all you have to do is cover your marginal cost in some part of your fixed cost. Whereas someone who's in the business full-time has to cover their average cost. There's an enormous cost advantage. Anybody use Spinlister? A lot of cities have bike rentals, but they're these big old guy bikes with Spinlister. If you're in New York for a week, you can rent a really nice bike. If you're in California for 3 days, you can rent a really nice bike. Now it's $40 or $50 a day, but that's actually almost the same as the rent from a hotel, and you can get a really nice one. So you take an asset that's expensive to store, a liability, and turn it into an actual asset, something that I can rent out for money. And the software takes care of it for you. It finds the person who wants to rent that bike at that place at that time. You don't have to do it. It handles the transaction. It has a price that you've quoted, and you only are contacted if somebody wants to pay that price. And it handles trust because if this market is dense enough, both the seller and the buyer have a lot of information about each other. That's provided by someone else, not by the company. It's the buyers and sellers themselves who have reputations. So notice the difference. If I can reduce transactions cost, I can have people find each other. All I'm providing is the reduction in transactions cost. I'm specializing. I, the entrepreneur, am specializing in selling reductions in transactions cost through this software. The buyers and sellers are finding each other. So when Uber says they're not a taxi company, it's true. There's a person with a car in a few minutes and another person who has a need for a ride. They normally can't find each other. Uber helps them find each other. That's all it does. It just sells the reduction in transactions costs. There are potential problems. There may be some things, the transactions cost of which we don't as a society want to reduce too much. Ashley Madison helps married people find other married people that they're not married to. And life is short, have an affair. Now, they've had some problems with the trust thing because of security, they got hacked. But the point is that, like any economic revolution, the logic of this is just if there's a willing buyer and willing seller, not is this something that in other moral terms we might favor. So we're commoditizing something that we might not approve of, but it becomes possible to make money by selling reductions in transactions costs. So the classic one, the most obvious one, is you need a ride, I have a car and some time, we couldn't find each other. An entrepreneur could start a taxi company, but then they'd have to cover their average costs. Because if I have a taxi and I'm driving it, I have to cover my average costs. If I have a car, I'm already making the payments on the car. I'm already paying upkeep for the car. I already have a place where I park it at night. I'm already a driver. But I have an hour, and if I can pay for my time, the gas, and the wear and tear on the engine and tires, the marginal cost, and some part of my car payment, I'm ahead, and so is the customer. So the value proposition here is that you're paying marginal instead of average cost, and everybody's better off if you can find each other. We haven't been able to. Uber sells reductions in transactions costs. How many people have stayed at Airbnb? I just love Airbnb. Whenever I go to New York, there's the same place that I stay in. It's in the East Village. It's $150 a night for a 2-bedroom apartment with a deck that looks out over the city. The hotels are $450 a night for a closet. I know the guy. I ask him for restaurant recommendations. A lot of the people who stayed in Airbnb, have you stayed in a room when someone else was in the house? Yeah. I mean, a lot of people actually like that. And the thing that they didn't really expect was many people like that. Once you know that person, and it was sort of a repeat business thing. What bar should I go to? I don't want to go to a tourist bar. Oh yeah, don't go there. There's this place down here. If you go down the steps, it's fantastic. They have great jazz, and there's nobody ever there. Local information is something that you get in addition because you use Airbnb. Does anybody know why Airbnb is called Airbnb?
Back in the day when it first started, was it just in your mind?
Back in the day, it was 10 years.
Yeah. But was it just in your mind?
Yes. And it's in Silicon Valley, and they were a bunch of programmers, so they're sallow, white, bad-smelling 25-year-old men. But they realize that there's a conference of programmers here, and if we can find a way to rent out a bunch of living rooms, and because they're sallow, stinky 25-year-old men, they don't have a whole lot of furniture. But they had air mattresses. They blow up the air mattress, and they had like a power bar and some water for breakfast. And they called it an air bed and breakfast. So for a long time, their name was Air Bed and Breakfast, which is a bad name. They got into Y Combinator, and Sam Altman at Y Combinator tells the story, that they come in, they say, we're gonna write software that helps people find these apartments that people aren't already using, and they wanted to work on the software. He said, well, where are you doing this? And they said, well, we don't care, it's software. Like he's an idiot. You don't understand software? It's on the internet. And he said, all right, stop what you're doing, all of you go to New York, and find just a couple of blocks. On those blocks, knock on doors. Tell people what you're doing. Say other people are doing it in the same neighborhood. Take professional pictures. Put up a good description and get enough density there that you have both proof of concept and word of mouth to spread. And don't do anything more on the software until you do that. Don't come back or I'll kill you. Well, they did that, and it started growing like crazy in New York. It turned out that having a small group that was well served was the way to start. So we had a few in Denver, a fair number in New York, and you see it start to grow 2009, 2010. Why in Europe? It was such a good idea that the people who stayed as customers in New York wanted to become sellers in Paris, Berlin. They said, well, I've got an apartment, I'm not always there, or I've got an extra room. 2011, 2012, just explodes. Huge increase in the number of listings. So this was actually in 2014, more than 500,000 people a day and 650,000 listings, 57,000 cities in 200 countries. And there's nothing really special about staying in an apartment. You can stay in a yurt, an RV, on a boat, a castle if you got one. So there's this stuff that people aren't using as much as they might, and they think, we ought to rent this out, but we're not going to because the transactions cost are too high. But software takes the place of robots in production, of selling reductions in transactions costs. The things that it would be expensive for people to do is really cheap for software to do. So 17 million nights in 2015, just in the summer. So it's still gigantic growth. If you compare Airbnb to hotels, it would be the third largest. Now, that's not quite right, because as I said, it's not really a hotel service. But just in terms of the order of magnitude, it's really big. And the interesting thing is that Airbnb is now starting to become something that business travelers stay in. That's going to be the switch. I just did an interview with a guy from the San Francisco Chronicle, and he's 25. And he was saying, well, Airbnb is going to collapse because all the cool hipsters aren't going to stay there. Yeah, you're right. It's the cool hipsters that are going to make it, not the businessmen that are going to stay there for 3 nights and spend $400. I actually think that's wrong. The transition to the business traveler using this is what's going to make it win. It is true that hipsters aren't going to want to stay anywhere. My son lives in the East Village. He's a stone hipster. He always burns his mouth on soup because he has to eat it before it's cool. I can wait. So once everybody else is doing it, it's not cool anymore. That's actually okay for making profits because it means that people trust it enough, that density is sufficient that you're solving the trust problem. Airbnb has a kind of network economy that makes its competitors really handicapped because there's so many ratings on Airbnb that you now can trust where someone's going to stay. If you had a lot of capital, you were going to start a new company to compete with Airbnb, you have an almost insuperable obstacle because you have to get ratings somehow. You're trying to outsource trust. How are you going to overcome that problem? So Airbnb has turned a corner. And I'm happy to share this, the PowerPoints. So, as I said, 3 economic revolutions. I'm not going to say much about the Neolithic or the Industrial. It is grandiose, though, that I would put these 3 on the same scale, because the Neolithic and the Industrial were pretty big. So if, in fact, this change is anything like that, it's substantial. So let me skip these and go, let me go to this. In a way, when we think about middlemen, we usually say what we want to do is get rid of the middleman. And what I'm saying is paradoxical, because I'm saying that people are going to concentrate on making money as the middleman. The thing is, though, that they'll be able to reduce the costs of being the middleman so much that there'll be an explosion in economic transactions for products that already exist. So I have 2 cautions and then a parable. The first caution, and those of you who listen to the Econ Talk have heard this one, but it is actually something I'm concerned about. I have 35 acres of forest south of Pittsburgh. It's sustainably managed. We are careful. We have a forester. We take some part of the trees. We try to preserve the habitat. 35 acres is quite a few trees. There's a lot of stuff there. There's not as much as there was because I killed and eaten some of it with a gun, I should point out. Suppose, so I paid for this, and I have a title, and my title is a piece of paper. What is the piece of paper worth? Well, it's worth something because I have the promise of the state under the rule of law to defend my exclusive right to use this. Now, I do admit that often when I walk around on that property, I do take my 20-gauge double-barreled little coach gun, because there might be a woodpecker. And red cockaded woodpeckers are on the endangered species list, and if there was a nest of a red cockaded woodpecker, I would lose all of my trees, because that area is not big enough. Now, I, of course, would never shoot it myself, but I have heard that if people see an endangered species, they will look both ways and then shoot it. So if it wasn't endangered, it's certainly endangered after it's on the endangered species list. That's a death sentence. But otherwise, that title says that this is mine. And if it's mine, it's not someone else's. Property is a combination of my liberty to use and my right to exclude. Property is a combination of my liberty to use within reason and my right to exclude. One day I'm walking around, let's say, and I hear chainsaws. That's a chainsaw. And I think, well, that sounds close. So I walk back into the woods, and 200 yards into my land, I see a logging operation. And there's these guys cutting trees, and they're putting the trees on trucks. And I said, whoa, there's obviously been a misunderstanding. I didn't sell any trees. And they say, yeah, we know that. Well, you're stealing my trees. Well, steal is such an ugly word. What we're doing is we're taking these trees and we're going to sell them, and we'll have a big advantage in the marketplace because we'll be able to sell them at a much lower price than you would, because all we have to do is pay the marginal cost. Whereas you have to pay taxes, you've got all sorts of stuff you have to pay. And I said, I'm going to make a call. And then with guns come. And it could be my sons, but it's not. It's the sheriff. The sheriff will actually send as many people as it takes to prevent that from happening, because I have title. I have a promise from the state. All of us probably think that that's okay. All right, now, I'm a taxi driver. And bolted to the hood of my car is a medallion. That medallion comes with a piece of paper. that says the state will prevent anyone who lacks a medallion from providing taxi services. So I'm a taxi driver and I see somebody picking up someone at the airport. And I say, what are you doing? And they say, well, I'm an Uber driver. No, you can't do that. Because I have title to the exclusive right, along with other medallion holders, to provide taxi services. And the state has made me a promise, and I've in good faith invested first in the medallion itself, which cost almost $1 million, which the state took from me and then used for other purposes. So the state made a promise in exchange for my payment. And the state has said that that promise would extend into the future. So I invested in taxis, I trained drivers, I have an infrastructure of communication. So in good faith, I invested because I had a promise from the state. Surprising number of people I find say that those two cases are completely different, and I'm not sure. It seems to me that under a rule of law, we should have some concern about the necessity of at least compensating the people who in good faith paid for medallions. Now, I happen to think there's a way out of that. Maybe we can talk more about it during questions. But it's not as bright line as, well, you own the pine trees, and we should just renege on the promise in the medallion. Well, why? That, maybe you're saying that the people who bought the medallion were dumb. I have colleagues at Duke who say that buying those trees was dumb because property's theft. If we're going to have a situation where property rights are defined by majority rule, we're in a whole different world. I actually want the promises of the state to mean something regardless of what the majority wants. So just the fact that y'all think medallions are bad is not good enough. The state makes a promise, it has to keep it. The second is a story you've probably mostly heard, so I'll just say it quickly. Those are sabots, wooden shoes. In northern France and Belgium in the 18th century, there were a lot of people who made textiles on hand looms. And they made a living by artisanally making hand looms. So artisans, pretty skilled, worked hard, made good linen. And then you started getting power looms. So mules, spinning jennies, automation and division of labor, where instead of one artisan making it, you get people on a production line, somebody spinning thread, somebody else working the mule, somebody working the jenny. And the mule is a machine, it's not a physical mule. They started making 100 times as much textiles. And the people who had lost their jobs were angry. So they came in and they threw their wooden shoes into these gears. And the gears were expensive. They were made out of hard wood. It was difficult to carve them. And they broke. So they're made out of hard wood, but you could break them. So that is sabotage. Throwing your shoe to break it into these machines, sabotage, has now come to mean the destruction or the attempt to hold back production processes. And all of these things, regardless of what you think about this problem, are going to face sabotage. Hotel owners are going to try to sabotage Airbnb. Taxi drivers and owners are going to try to sabotage Uber. All of these instances of people who now sell stuff being driven out of business by people who sell reductions in transactions cost are going to face regulatory barriers and violence because the stakes are really high. Well, the parable. How many of you own a drill? Why? Imagine, well, I have a drill, I use it pretty often. I was trying to think how often. I probably use it 4 or 5 times a year for half an hour each. The median time that a lifetime is used, that a drill is used lifetime is less than 20 minutes. So you look at all the drills, because if you use a drill, use it for a minute and a half. So use some across that. And so many people have drills, they're not sure where they are, they dig them out, and then they use it for a few minutes. And for me, my wife wants to hang a picture, and so I'll put the two in, I'll put the anchors in, she'll look at it, and I'm done with the drill, except that she says, well, no, I don't want it there, I want it over here. So I do it again, and I drill 2 more holes, and I put it up, and then I have to spackle those, and I'm cursing and stuff. But, so I don't use the drill for very long, but then I put it back. Suppose I pull up my phone, and fire up Uber, scroll down, because there's a bunch of things that I can rent. One of them is transportation services, but one of them is power tools. I click on power tools, I click on drill. I've already put in there all my preferences, so it knows which one I want. A commercial quality drill, much better than the one that I actually have, is selected by a computer program at a hardware store whose location I don't know and don't need to know. And an Uber driver that I don't know and don't need to know, who happens to be nearby, and the software knows that, gets a signal, there's a pickup. They go by and either barcoded or some radio signal tells it, you dump all of the things that it's picked up from the hardware store into a pod in the Uber car. And there's no driver in the Uber car, by the way. It's also driven by software. Now in that pod, things are sorted by the software. And an algorithm, an answer to the traveling salesman problem of the delivery that takes the least time is selected by the software. The car goes to all those places, and each of the deliveries is put into a locked pod outside of the person's house or apartment. My phone buzzes. Ah, my drill's here. I go down and get it. I put my phone next to it, it unlocks because it recognizes my phone, or I use a thumbprint, so it's completely safe. I use the drill for 4 or 5 minutes, I put it back. The drill knows, the pod knows that it needs to be picked up, and it knows where it needs to go. I don't need to worry about any of that. And the $4 that this cost me has already been transferred to Uber and to the hardware store. Another Uber driver that I don't know, optimally happens to be going by, picks it up, takes it back. Probably not first, because there's not that big a hurry. That drill is rented out 7 or 8 times per day. At $28 a day, you can pay back a drill, a really high quality drill, pretty fast. You can make money by renting out the drill. And for $4, I get a really high quality drill and don't have to store it. A nice espresso maker, a sausage maker, a bread maker. All of the things that we now spend hundreds of dollars for and use rarely could be delivered in just this fashion. But we would rent them rather than own them. Now, it used to be that there were a lot of mom and pop bookstores, and there's still some mom and pop style bookstores in college towns, but people lamented the fact that these small bookstores were driven down by bastards like Barnes and Noble. They have an unfair advantage. They've got these big warehouses. They have a lot of books and really low cost. They must be stocked. Selection, nice atmosphere, it's a coffee shop. Well, turns out a lot of people really like Barnes and Noble. So they would sit in the coffee shop, they'd take their kids there, they would have shows, and so Barnes and Noble became the good guy, and the new bastards were Amazon. Amazon has an unfair advantage. They have no bricks and mortar. They can just sell stuff. Well, it turned out that Amazon was not a bookstore. Amazon sold reductions in transactions cost for buying stuff. And if you look at the front end of a whole lot of retail internet websites, down at the bottom it'll say powered by AWS. AWS is Amazon Web Services. The thing that Amazon had was software. That was the reason Amazon became profitable, was software. Amazon Web Services was a brilliant way of finding stuff and finding people, getting them together, having the transaction take place, and solving the trust problem. There's no way to fight Amazon, is there? Yes, the new bastards will be Uber. Uber is not a threat to the taxi companies. Uber is a threat to Amazon. If we rent things, Uber's software has an advantage because it solves the three problems in a way that also involves delivery and pickup. In a way Amazon can't. They're good at delivering stuff in boxes. That's actually pretty expensive compared to, we got a couple of them today. These are big boxes. We're always trying to find ways to make them cheaper. But if you could reuse them, it'd be better to make them more expensive. Think of all the waste, both in terms of the environment, all that corrugated, an enormous amount of corrugated boxes. So the paradox is the stuff we package shouldn't be lighter, it should be heavier, so we can reuse it. And if you rent it, it would be. So when we think of Tomorrow 3.0, remember that Uber is likely to kill Amazon. Delivery services for rentals are likely to overcome ownership. Our houses won't need closets. We won't need parking lots. We won't need garages. We'll make far more efficient use of the stuff that we already have. Here's the real problem. Just like robots and division of labor cost people jobs. Well, there's always the service economy, right? Service jobs aren't that great, but there's always the service economy. Gee, software kills service jobs. Wages are going to fall. Wages are going to fall dramatically, but economists know that we don't really care about nominal wages. We care about real wages. Prices are also going to fall dramatically. And the question is, which is going to fall more? I think there's every reason to be optimistic. If this rental economy works the way that I think it will, prices are going to fall farther than wages. We'll have a 2-day work week. Many people won't have traditional jobs at all. They'll work in the gig economy. They'll use their LinkedIn account as a way of software finding a position for them for 2 or 3 days a month, and then they have enough money to pay all their rentals. So they don't need to own stuff. It will still be pretty bad for people that don't have some source of income, and so there is a dark side. If your wages fall more than prices, there'll be a net harm. But I think prices will fall so far that they'll be below the decline in nominal wages for most people, and the net result will be positive. Thank you for listening. And I've talked so long, there's not so much time for questions, but.
This is really gross. Oh, yeah, we've got 15 minutes.
So are we going to change the tax system? It seems like the tax system is another, maybe you could call it transaction cost. But if I own my house and rent it to myself, I don't pay, unlike in Switzerland, I don't, in the US currently pay taxes on it. If I own my car, I don't pay taxes on the service. Well, is that a transaction cost or is that just something different?
And given how low interest rates are, the capital cost of having this asset is pretty low. So that's certainly a problem. I think that the other reductions in price will overwhelm that. I thought you were going to say that, because we have shorter run tax problems also. Uber and Airbnb in particular have found out the way to turn the state from enemy into eager puppy is to write tax payments into their software. So Airbnb now is pretty cool most places because they're paying local taxes. Uber in North Carolina solved this problem by paying taxes. Amazon, as you remember, for a long time resisted because they said, well, we're from out of state, we don't have to pay state sales taxes. Now they are paying state sales taxes and they're building bricks and mortar warehouses locally so they can provide them very quick. Amazon seems, it actually turns out to be a big advantage once you write the tax payments into your software. So I think that's a difficult problem. The problem that you raise is a deeper one, and I certainly don't know the answer. The way that we handle the implicit transaction of me selling it to myself and not being taxed, the way that we solve the implicit, if I mow my lawn, I don't pay taxes on the transaction. Whereas if I pay someone in cash, of course, he doesn't either, but he's supposed to. So there is a different tax treatment on owning and renting to myself, you're right. And that's a problem that really only economists know about. But for some assets, it's big enough to make a difference.
Well, on your trees and taxis comparison there, I was thinking that as you look at your tree farm, you come across the tree poachers and you have your 20 gauge, and you're definitely within your rights to scare them away with a threat of violence because they're violating your property rights.
If I scare away, if I threaten to shoot them, they can have me charged with assault.
On your own property.
It is on my property, but it's not my house. I can't defend my property with force.
I thought that you could. Well, regardless,
If they threaten me, I could shoot them, but I can't threaten them.
Right. I thought, but
I can call the police.
in terms of that, you know,
Guns will be there in no time.
yeah, and basically you're outsourcing the guns,
Yeah.
right? You're saying, well, I can't shoot you, but I can bring down people that I've hired to shoot you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But that becomes a little bit different when you put it into a public arena of, I have a right to that passenger on the sidewalk, and if somebody else tries to
You
pick
have
you.
the right to it.
Right, I know, I'm saying, but the taxi driver has purchased this right from the state that says, and if he tried to defend that right with violence or hire people with violence that doesn't seem like those are equivalent things.
They're not equivalent.
Yeah.
The question is that on the other side of some line that's so different that it's just obvious that the state can lie with impunity about licenses.
Right.
So this whole thing about you went to eye surgeon school for a long time, we were kidding about that. Anybody can be an eye surgeon. Yee. It's going to reduce the investment people are willing to make if it's not a good faith promise. And I think there's all sorts of other arguments against licensing, but this one's done. We bought the tobacco quota, for God's sake. On the tobacco quota, you can make all sorts of argument that that was wrong, but we paid for it. We gave reparations to people. They were harmed. They were actually harmed. This is the usual sort of Tulukian transitional gains trap. Once you create this rent, then the rent is capitalized in the value of the assets, and to just say, oh, we were kidding, they take a loss. And the reason they take a loss is that in good faith, they believed in the promise of the state. Whatever else the state should do, it should make actual promises about property rights and carry them out. I think the answer is we do make exceptions for regulatory takings. So if I have, and that was the reason I gave the example of the woodpecker, if they say, no, there's woodpeckers on your land, I say, all right, that's fine, but then you have to compensate me for the fact that I can't sell my wood. Well, no, it's a regulatory taking. This is a regulatory giving. So a taxi medallion, we understand that its value is going to depend on political decisions. And so it's not that the medallion has no value. You can still have a taxi. In fact, it's still true that the only people who can drive orange, yellow taxis in New York, you have to have a medallion. That right is still defended. It's just that it turned out to be less valuable because there's this competitor. So we're not going to compensate for taking away regulatory givings, just like we don't compensate for regulatory takings. I think there is a qualitative difference. I'm not sure I believe the argument I just made, but there is a qualitative difference. And in fact, we do not compensate for regulatory takings, as long as it's less than 100%.
Right.
So Palazzolo versus Rhode Island established, it was like 95%, but it wasn't 100%. And so you're a double dipper here. Is there somebody else? All right.
Can you rent your gun?
If the transactions cost are low enough. See, I'm a Kosian on this.
How they'd be low enough? Say, I don't own guns.
You're a closet leftist.
I want to,
I have to be able to know what entrepreneurs are going to do in advance. before I can make an argument, you're saying. Why
Well,
would I
don't
know what
I don't know
entrepreneurs
how
can
to-
do?
Unless you're gonna say that we're gonna invent a transporter system such that.
I don't know.
At an uncertain need for something, I can get it instantaneously.
Yep. People can never fly, because I can't imagine how they could build an airplane.
Well, let's just put it this way, it doesn't seem like it would be a transition that's gonna be quick. And the argument that you wouldn't own anything seems like an exaggeration.
Sure. It was a provocation.
Yeah.
And it worked.
It worked.
I think it's remarkable that we think we have to be able to imagine in advance the innovations that will take place before we allow that path is worth starting down. Of course, we can't imagine that. It's beyond our imagination. And it might be that we own a lot of things. I'm going to own my toothbrush, I'm going to guess. I'm going to own maybe bed sheets, clothing, there's all sorts of things that I will own. And a gun doesn't take up much space.
Neither does a drill.
None of those things by themselves do, and yet my storage unit is this long and this wide. It's big and it's completely full.
Well, you're just a pack rat.
Pack rat.
But, I mean,
Hoarding.
it is, you started to sort of investigate what are the limits to this, and that's what Doug's bringing up. So, I mean, you take the tool example, there's a waiting cost, right? And even if it's only as little as 15 minutes, you're waiting 15 minutes. And that compared to the price of a drill is pretty small. And then you get the drill, you realize, no, you didn't need a drill. You need something different, you wait another 15 minutes. So you're probably going to have a toolbox for a long time.
As I said to you at the beginning, I picked the drill because it's 2 or 3 steps beyond anything I can imagine actually working.
Okay.
So there's no way this is right. So I have tried to pick something that I don't think we can rent and say, that's how it would work if we did. If there's enough density, you have to be in cities. Out in the country, there's no way you would get this delivered very fast. Of course, you would own stuff. But in cities, it might be that you could get it in a very short amount of time. People probably thought, you're going to deliver dinner and it's still going to be hot? There's no way you can do that. That's crazy. Well, in fact, it happens. And there are delivery services that you can get a lot of things pretty quickly. Now, the waiting cost is something. 1, 2.
Well, it's more of a comment than a question, but for me, the delivery of a drill actually doesn't seem that unlikely. If you're not paying to store it and maintain it, even if you have, so if you get the drill and realize you need something else, the cost of your time and going back to the store and exchanging it to a lot of people would be more than the rental fee or whatever.
My wife sometimes talks about our $1,000 faucet. Now, the faucet probably only cost $50, but I did it. There was water everywhere. I had 4 trips to the hardware store. And it ended up costing at least $1,000 if you include the opportunity cost of my time, because I schlepped to the store. Oh, I don't have the thing I need. I went back. It certainly, there's waiting costs of me going, standing in line, buying the thing, and coming back too. So there's plenty of things which, if like that, if I could order them quickly, incredibly.
Just the capital investment. I mean, I'm very handy. I have a lot of tools.
Oh, sure. You're a seller.
Right.
You're a seller. You don't use the tools all the time. You're the guy renting them out.
Right.
There's going to be plenty of guys like you. You're a seller. So there's people that use tools most, but not all, of the time.
Right.
And you can rent them out. Question back here.
Yeah, kind of switching up the topic a little bit. You talked a little bit about sabotage, and you made the inference that this type of sharing economy will lead to a monopolization of markets. I mean, you talked about Airbnb being like one company, and that, having other companies walk into, Airbnb markets would be somewhat insurmountable.
Well, then I gave examples of the sequential surmounting very quickly. So the people talked about Microsoft, we've got to break them up. Amazon's too powerful.
But,
None of that's true.
Yeah, but, that is one, like Airbnb is one software, right? And, do you think like that type of monopolization of markets, not that the government can do anything, but that the risk of sabotage will be so great because it would be so catastrophic. I mean, you look at Lyft and Uber and all these other softwares, I mean, they're not very different. One simple hack would not only hack Uber, it could also hack Lyft. You can also hack all these other companies because the differences within their software is minimal.
You're asking, that's an interesting question. Does this make us more vulnerable to
Large scale
attacks or-
sabotage,
Yeah, sure.
like something that would be so catastrophic to society itself that we would limit, the sharing economy in general.
It is possible, when you realize big economies of scale, the more dependent you are on each other, the more vulnerable you are in a way. And that was true in the Neolithic Revolution. One of the consequences of the Neolithic Revolution was people are living together in tight quarters with domesticated animals, and so hygiene has changed, they get all sorts of diseases, and you have plagues. So the equivalent of plagues, if you have that sort of interdependence and tight density of markets, will certainly happen. Like the Neolithic, though, it's irresistible, it's going to happen. So we might say there's some things that we can do to try to reduce it. Yes, ma'am?
Well, just going off of your sink example and thinking about what you're talking about with services, I don't know that services are kind of going to go out as quickly as we think, partially because of liability. So you take the drill, extend it a little bit further, you have a nail gun. I don't necessarily trust that someone's going to know how to use a nail gun without shooting their thumb off. So it might be in the best interest of the person who owns it. Someone could use it, but they might break it.
Well,
So
it's
if
certainly
you-
possible for Uber to deliver a nail gun and a guy.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So I don't think the services are going to get quite so divided out because it's going to be not only in my best interest for someone else to have the drill, but to come in, spend the same 5 minutes I would have spent, and no one gets hurt.
Yeah. Well, if you Google another software, if you Google Uber but for, there's a lot of them, and Uber but for doctors. Now, a lot of places you can get house calls, and Uber shows up and there's a doctor. And it's amazing because house calls are gone. We'll never have I can't imagine house calls. Well, it turns out if you reduce transactions cost, a lot of people would like to not have to go sit in some sorry doctor's office for 3.5 hours. If you have a doctor that shows up, it takes 3 minutes to, yep, that's sprained all right, or you've got an infection, or yes, it sounds like you have a problem, you're going to give you some antibiotics, and then goes, I would pay more for that. So a lot of people are paying out of their pockets for Uber but for doctors. And there was, in one city, they had Uber but for kittens for a day. So they delivered kittens.
Kittens.
Go, just try it. See if you can find something that you won't find. Uber but for, there's a lot of stuff. You'll have a hard time finding it something that somebody hasn't thought of. Yes, sir.
You talked about the drill example when you could be set ahead to where it's the only thing that you could think of that you couldn't actually think of what would happen. With that idea, you have no idea what else there could be. You're talking about prices dropping. People who didn't think about the economy of scale and having basically monopolies to be able to stop all the prices. Do you think that entrepreneurship would drop in the however long future because of barriers to entry?
No. Because there's all sorts of things we don't now think of as commodities. So if you, I didn't talk about Bitcoin. Let's combine this now with Bitcoin. Because what Bitcoin does is provide two more things, which is a reliable exchange of currency, except for the problems that it has with volatility, because it's not a currency, it's an investment. So if you can get away from that problem. The innovation of Bitcoin is the blockchain. So the blockchain records these transactions. We don't need lawyers, we don't need banks, we don't need all the institutions that right now prevent third world countries from being able to be entrepreneurs. They can't borrow against wealth, but if they have Bitcoins, they can borrow against it, and they have a reliable way of conducting transactions. So each block is chained. You have a ledger of all the transactions that go back to the Genesis block. That means that if I can write Python, C, HTML, I can be an entrepreneur absolutely anywhere. So I'm in Pakistan, and I can get two people in New Jersey together who are looking for each other but don't know it, and make something off of that transaction. So it means that poor people all over the world now have some hope. When I give this talk in Central Europe, the room is full. We had to move twice There was a university in central Slovakia, and I can't pronounce the city, it has a bunch of letters in it. A bunch of letters in it. Not many vowels either. I think over half the letters were J. We moved to a bigger room, and then we moved to a bigger room again. This is their way out. Because all they have to do is think of a way to reduce transactions cost on something that's not now a commodity. So I think there are big economies of scale, and until the cycle of destruction may get shorter and shorter. And before long, we'll say, oh, Uber got wiped out by somebody else that had a different idea. The difference is now everybody's in the game. You don't have to have banks, you don't have to have lawyers, you don't have to have rule of law. All the things that we think hold back development. If Bitcoin actually becomes, because Bitcoin, less than 10% of Bitcoin transactions take place in the United States. The place where Bitcoin is useful is not when you have a credit card. How many of y'all own a Bitcoin?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're hobbyists. If we're in the US and you own Bitcoin, you're a hobbyist. And it's fun, it's great, it's interesting to talk about. But if you're a Muslim woman in Pakistan, you can own Bitcoins and have a business that won't be stolen by your husband, that your neighbors won't know about, and that are reliable because you can't go to a lawyer and make sure that the transaction takes place, whereas the blockchain will take care of it. So the Bitcoin changes everything, not because it's a currency, it sucks as a currency. They should denominate Bitcoin in dollars or euros or something else. The blockchain is the innovation. So you license that and then change the unit to something that somebody else manages. Outsource the value unit and have the transaction processing part of it be what becomes the key. I have goosebumps just talking about it. Yes, sir.
So we talk,
Yes, sir.
okay. Yeah, when we talk about like the shared economy, we talk a lot about trust, and it's oftentimes compared, especially for us young people, to like how we look at Amazon reviews, or like you talked about in Rotten Tomatoes or something. But the type of trust that we have to invest for something like that is different than the type of trust that I need to get into someone's car or to sleep in someone's house. And my question is, do you
But
think...
you do that now.
I do that now, but
In a taxi.
In a taxi.
Why?
Well, but what we're talking about is like, you know, that's, I can feel like they're guaranteed by the state. But my question is, when I'm sleeping in a stranger's house, someone that I'm only going based on reviews that I've read from what I think are my peers but could not be, you know, they could be fake reviews, something like that. My question is, do you think that there is a chance for an increased amount of trust within a community after experiencing these kinds of things multiple times, being with people, talking with people, living with people? You know, these are very personal environments, people that you wouldn't normally possibly engage with. Do you think there's a chance of kind of that creating a better community through that?
Sure. You asked two questions, really. The first one was about how can I trust these private ones when I know for sure that I can trust the state. I got into a taxi at LGA in New York because Bitcoin's illegal. Bitcoin. Uber is illegal. Bitcoin's illegal too. But so Uber is illegal. The driver learned that I was not from there, but I did know the way. As soon as we get across the bridge, he turns north instead of south towards NYU, and he stops speaking English. I'm yelling at him. Finally, we go south. We get down to NYU, and I say, can I use a credit card? His English becomes perfect. He said, oh yes, let me show you how. He runs my credit card and gives himself a 50% tip.
What?
I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I had to wait at the airport for a long time. So I go to the taxi commission to complain. It turns out you have to complain between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on weekdays in person. So the taxis suck. The hotels suck. The people that the hotels have working for them don't have background checks. Airbnb, you can have a background check. They actually check your ID. So the person that you're afraid of, I know I know for a fact you have to send them a picture of your passport. If you want to sell on Airbnb, you have to have a picture of your passport. They run a check, at least where you've been arrested, and you have their financial information. You don't know anything about the bellhop.
No, I don't disagree that I actually think that the private sector version of this is
The second
more,
question-
more secure because of all that, and because they have you know, their legitimacy at risk as opposed to.
But you could game that, and there will be a problem. It's just that there's also a problem with the state-run system. The real interesting thing that you bring up is once we've solved this problem, we have repeat business, and that is where I think Airbnb shines. Like the guy that I know in New York, I always stay there. He gives me restaurant tips. He gives me bar tips. That's absolutely the advantage that we have here. Whereas in a hotel, I go and talk to the concierge, maybe he helps, but maybe the restaurant that paid him $50 to send schmoes like me there and is overpriced as a result. So the deal that hotels have, there's no reason why the Airbnb guy would have that problem. So I think you're absolutely right, that's a feature rather than a bug. So being able to do repeat business and have communities, local communities. One more thing, I know we're late. In Brooklyn, there are guys that make pickles that are just amazing. They're $6 or $7 per jar, and they're delivered in just a 5 or 6 block area by Uber. So it's just a community. And there's people that make stuff that before I couldn't possibly have sold enough of to make a living, that now are able to sell locally. So if you want to buy local food, this is your answer. Because you can find it because of the reduction, say it with me, of transactions costs. It's a solution to that problem. Reducing the costs of community is the real benefit of this. And so I'm glad we closed on that question, because that's a really hopeful thing. Whatever else happens, we'll see communities that actually have human connections that until now have been prevented by transactions.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thank you all for coming.
Do we get a list? Do we get a list?
We've got one floating around somewhere. Okay.
Doesn't have to be perfect,
Video
as
tug,
you know.
I would love to
But-
have access to it.
If,
Where do you have the list?
Dr. Munger, is it okay if we put the video into public, or, yeah, okay? Might even really good. So is that?
Yes, I guess I can.
I mean, it's probably, if you guys